You take a lot of sexual assault cases on. I just know that from talking with you. So, and this can really go any direction. You know, what's your take on the state of sexual assault cases these days, from your experience of defending falsely accused as well as people that were actually guilty? I mean, obviously you're defending people that are guilty. So what's the state with what's going on with sexual assault cases right now?
I think we could probably do an entire hour on this one topic alone, but I'll try to sum it up. I think the military has inadvertently incentivized individuals to make false allegations, and by that, if you are caught in a bad situation, whether that's, maybe you are cheating and your husband or your wife finds out, or you're in a compromised position that may ruin your career, the Army's come up with that, the DoD has come up with what's called the safe to report policy, which means that you are not going to get prosecuted for any collateral misconduct that you had if you make an allegation of sexual assault. So now you instantly get a get out of jail free card, so to speak, for your career, for the adultery, for violating the curfew, for drunken disorderly, for fraternization, whatever it happens to be. Second, you can now get, you always be able to get what's called an expedited transfer. So the military is a lot of places we don't want to be at. You might not want to be at Camp Humphreys. You might not want to be in Minot, North Dakota. It's cold there in December. And if you make an allegation of sexual assault, you're going to be offered what's called an expedited transfer to a duty station of your choosing to get away from your assailant. And so these are just two things. And there's a lot of other things as well. I mean, you can get a disability rating because of an allegation of sexual assault. And if that sexual assault allegation goes to trial and it's proven, you're almost guaranteed a disability rating. And now you're going to be getting a monthly paycheck for really the rest of your life, with inflation provisions in it, right? And so it's really hard to say that how can people, in particular those who have joined the military, be so cold in order to make these false accusations? And Jason, I don't have an answer for that. I really wish I did. Mm-hmm. But, people aren't always who you think they are. And I've seen it. I've seen false accusations happen. And I've seen false accusations. I've seen the growth of false accusations happen at a rapid pace, almost an alarmingly rapid pace. I've seen more and more of them, and it's almost exponential, the growth. But I know they're false accusations. I've seen the evidence, and I can prove it. So I think that's one piece of it. The other piece of it is I think the Army and the military in general has gotten extraordinarily aggressive with sexual assault prosecutions. And on one side, they should. Right. On one side, the sexual assault, let's be serious, sexual assault has no place in the military. There's no tolerance for sexual assault.
Especially when it has to do with minors, too. That's when you're really getting into something egregious, I feel.
If that happens, the military or prosecutors should be prosecuting.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I'm not one to say, let's get these people to walk. You should be prosecuting that.
Let me interrupt this chain of thought. Let's just say I'm in the military and I'm guilty. And I'm watching you right now. Should I attempt to hire you?
Absolutely, you should. But let me give you the answer.
You don't like people who are sexual offenders. So why should I get an attorney that's going to say straight up, man, I think what you did is terrible, but I'm going to defend you.
Okay, got it. And there are different levels of things, right? I don't like people that get belligerent and drunk, right? There are different levels of that. There's different levels of type of misconduct. And so going back, so this issue, I'm guilty, why should I defend them? Well, first off, how do I know they're guilty? They may say they're guilty, all right? But what are the facts and circumstances beyond that? Are there mitigating facts? Are there extenuating facts? What's the culpability there? So, okay, I sexually assaulted someone. That's a horrific crime. But let's look at that. Let's deep dive that and actually put our intellectual hat on, and let's look at this with some level of maturity and not emotion, okay? So let's say on one end of it, you have someone that is an aggressive predator who's preying on women and is going out there and drugging them, dragging them back to a location and violently sexually assaulting them. That is an awful human being, one that would do something along those lines. Okay, that's sexual assault. It's rape. On the other side of that, you have someone who, and let's say they go out and they're having something to drink and they meet up with someone who's also drinking. They're both intoxicated. They both have sex while intoxicated, right? And that individual, maybe the person, the victim was more intoxicated, too intoxicated to consent, but because the offender was also drinking, maybe perhaps he didn't have a full understanding of that. But either way, she was too intoxicated to consent to. So did he technically commit alcohol-facilitated sexual assault? He did. All right. Do you think the punishment for the person who was drinking and had an otherwise consensual encounter with someone who might have been too drunk to actually give consent, who, they had a dating relationship, they were together. The punishment for that offender, I think, is pretty clear. It's going to be fundamentally different than someone who's predatory, right? And what happens now in the military when the person who is on the light side of things that had the alcohol facilitated sexual assault, and let's say they say, hey, I want to take responsibility for it, but the government says, no, we're going to give you 20, 30 years in prison for that. Is that the right answer? Is that the right answer? So sometimes you have to fight you have to mitigate, you have to litigate to mitigate here. And you have to be able to tell this person's story to say, hey, this is a person, let's say they're a combat vet, they did 2 deployments, they have an alcohol problem, and they've been having an alcohol problem because of the PTSD they had while on deployment to a combat zone, because 2 of their battle buddies blew up in a freaking IED. And this is a person he's been in a romantic dating relationship for 6 months, and she was more intoxicated than he thought she was. All right, but maybe legally she couldn't consent. That's a fundamentally different position than someone who's just a serial predatory rapist. And the problem is, it's one of the military doesn't often look at that. They say, okay, we need to be tough on sexual assault, so we're going to try to give this guy 20 years in prison for something where, okay, even if he, quote, did it, that's not what the punishment should be in the evidence. The punishment has to fit the crime, but in the military it often doesn't. So how do you get there? You don't get there by filing my notice of representation and saying, hey, Tim Bilecki's here, drop all the charges. It just doesn't work that way. And I kind of joke with clients, they pay me, I'd like to make one phone call and the case goes away. I make a $40,000 phone call. That would be epic. It just never happens that way. I mean, that would be awesome. But the reality is, you've got to go in there and fight, and you've got to go plead not guilty, and you've got to show the evidence and get the discovery and fight this and litigate the motions and do all the hard work to maybe get to the end result.
Yeah, because a lot of times people are fundamentally honest. They're like, yeah, I did this, I did that, so I must be guilty of what they're accusing me of. And you're like, as an attorney, you could say, I don't think you realize what they're actually accusing you of, or maybe you don't understand what the repercussions are of saying that you're guilty to this.
All the time, Jason. That you really summed up what I was saying very succinctly. That happens quite a bit. That's where, clients who call me up and they're brutally honest with me, they're the best clients in the world. So if you say, hey, Tim, I was accused of this, a great example, right? Housing fraud, BAH fraud. I mean, that happens all the time. And they call me up and say, yep, I'm actually guilty of this. Okay, I did this. I said, okay, well, you did, but let's look at what you're charged with. You've got 6 charges on the charge sheet here. You're actually guilty of specification 2 of charge 2 and not guilty of everything else. You don't realize that. So let's do an actual analysis of this. And, when I have a client who's honest with me, I'm actually more likely to take that case on, as I've always said. I don't like people I'm a big believer in integrity. I say in jury trials all the time that integrity is either a character trait or a character flaw. I mean, how many people do you know with some integrity? I mean, for me, it's binary. You either have it or you don't have it, right? And so if people don't have integrity with me, then how the hell am I going to represent them and spend 100 hours with them? And why would I want to do that? I have to life's all about choices. I talk about freedom. I love freedom. It's one of the reasons I live in Florida now, as opposed to Hawaii, because you have a lot more freedoms. But you have the freedom to choose, and I can choose how I spend my time. And when I trade, money or a fee for time, I get to choose who my clients are. Different, they get to choose me. And if there's someone that has no integrity and they don't want to be honest with me, then I'm not going to trade my time to do that type of work. And so, yeah, if you call me up and say, hey, sir, I think I'm guilty of this because of A, B, C, and D, well, let's talk about it and figure it out.